Yeah, yeah.
She is also there, but still. She's still a usable old lady, so I'll have her work more. Without knowing I was listening, Catherine, the wife of the eldest son, was happily talking to someone on the phone. Then, when I moved to the new house, come over for a visit. Saying this, she hung up the phone. Passed by me on her bicycle with shopping bags from the supermarket. As I watched her back, I muttered, "I'll get you for this," and, with a certain resolution, I called the real estate agent and said, "I gladly accept that matter. My name is Emily. I will be 56 this year. At the end of last year, I lost my husband, who was 9 years older than me. After 5 years of caregiving. Now, I live alone in a familiar apartment complex. It was indeed lonely spending New Year's alone, so I asked my eldest son and his wife, who live nearby, won't you come over for New Year's? However, they made vague excuses like, we're a bit busy. We have various things going on, and didn't even stop by our house. Originally, even when I asked for help with my husband's care, my eldest son and his wife always said they were too busy and hardly ever visited. Feeling down by myself wouldn't help. So I decided to start something new with the inheritance from my husband. The place where I live is a tourist spot, and my husband used to run a souvenir shop. When I visited as a tourist, he fell in love with me at first sight. Despite our age difference, he was persistent, and we ended up getting married. After marrying, I helped out at the store and enjoyed working there. The shop was often visited by foreign tourists. And I could speak several languages as I lived abroad for a long time, was highly valued. Even after having 2 children, I worked there whenever I had time, enjoying it. After my husband suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and fell ill, I took over the running of the souvenir shop. Although I mostly left it to a veteran head clerk, and only occasionally attended meetings or received reports as the owner, I handed over the souvenir shop to the head clerk, who had served us for many years, and bought a house to try my hand at a trendy private accommodation. This is because my husband disliked owning a home, and we always lived in a rented apartment. After the funeral, it'll just become an empty house and a burden to the children. We don't need it. A person can live with just a little bit of space. That was his logic. It might be true, but living in a lovely house was my dream. However, living alone in a big house would be empty and meaningless. That's when I thought of the homestay business, popular among foreign tourists. I love interacting with strangers. Originally, when I was single, I was active, traveling alone overseas and making friends in various countries. Building a beautiful house and hosting people in it would not only fulfill my long-held dream but also contribute to the tourist spot that had taken care of me for so many years. If I find a successor for the homestay before I die, it won't become vacant. Once I set my mind to it, I couldn't sit still and immediately took action. Starting something new made me forget my loneliness, and my gloomy feelings disappeared as if they were a lie. Fortunately, I found a very nice new house. It was a modern-style house, conveniently located near a station. It seemed like it would please foreign tourists. However, due to its elaborate decoration, it was a bit pricey. So it seemed it hadn't found a buyer yet. I decided on the spot and bought it in cash. In fact, my husband had inherited a considerable fortune from his parents. But as a businessman, he had saved it for a rainy day without spending much of it. Therefore, having inherited a substantial inheritance, I still had savings left even after buying the new house. Then, I began studying the procedures for starting a homestay with great enthusiasm. Then, to my surprise, I got a call from Catherine, my eldest son's wife. "Hi Emily, it's been a while. How have you been feeling? Any changes?" Catherine's attitude had completely changed from her usual prickly self to a sweet, ingratiating tone. Suspicious, I responded coldly, nothing much has changed. How about you? Still busy as usual? And she replied, not at all, not at all. I always have time to talk to you. I wondered what was going on. Actually, when my husband had suggested that our eldest son, Tom, take over the souvenir shop, he had refused, saying, I don't want such a shabby shop. He then left home and was doing something like an event waiter in the city. I heard that he met Catherine there and they got married. We weren't even invited to the wedding, they registered their marriage without telling us. So I knew nothing about her background. After getting married, for some reason, they returned to our countryside. Tom became a truck driver at a company run by an old acquaintance. Rumors suggest he had done some risky things and fled the city. Catherine seems to be working part-time, but her attendance seems to be poor and I have not heard good things about her. By the way, Tom's sister had moved to Florida after getting married. So the only relatives I could call family here were Tom and his wife. I tried to reach out to them, but they seemed annoyed, so I thought, well, they're adults, let them do what they want, and I left them alone. Despite my confusion, Catherine continued to talk non-stop. By the way, Emily, you're being secretive, aren't you? If you bought a new house, you should tell us. Huh? Oh, that house? As I tried to continue, that house is, she cut me off, asserting, it's for us, right? Huh? I saw it, I saw it. I mean, you didn't consult us, but... Well, if it's such a lovely house, it's fine, don't worry. No, that's not for you. I bought it for the homestay business. As I managed to interject, Catherine, seemingly not listening, handed the phone to Tom. Mom? Thanks for setting up the house. When are we moving?
Yeah.
You know. We'll be moving to the family home next month. I'll let you know the date. Listen. It's not for you guys, I bought it for the homestay business. Huh? Homestay? More important than us? That can't be right. Tom seemed to have forgotten his past actions. Then, when Catherine took the phone back, she said, well then, thank you, and hung up. I felt a headache coming on. After a while, I received an email from them, with the date of their move written in it. As I was pondering what to do, I happened to see Catherine at the supermarket. I overheard her saying,
Yeah.
She is also there, but still. She's still a usable old lady, so I'll have her work more. I realized that I needed to teach them that the world doesn't revolve around their convenience. On the day they said they were moving, I was enjoying the flowers in a completely different location. The weather was good, and it was a wonderful day. Suddenly, when I checked my phone, I saw 26 missed calls from Catherine. Finding it troublesome, I decided to cancel my cell phone service. My new life didn't require the old phone number. And there was no need to explain myself to someone who wouldn't listen. And twist facts to suit their convenience. I got a new smartphone. My husband had always said, you don't need a smartphone, and only allowed me to have a cell phone. Surprised by its convenience after attending a few smartphone classes, I quickly learned to use it and began applying it to my new job. Yes, now I am involved in a new business in a new land. It was a tourism business in Florida. Actually, my daughter, who had married and moved to Florida, wanted to start a winery and vineyards with her husband. We're starting a winery, she had said. Mom, won't you come and help us? We need someone who knows the business. She had been inviting me ever since my husband passed away. Perhaps she was worried about me living alone. However, at that time, I had plans for the homestay business and had declined. saying, "I appreciate the thought and am happy, but it's a bit difficult right now." But then, somehow, Tom and Catherine misunderstood and were intent on taking over the new house, even planning to use me like a housekeeper. Just before I learned this fact, someone had approached me, desperately wanting to buy a new house. A real estate agent mediated the deal, and the buyer was even willing to pay more than the asking price. When asked why, they were in the process of moving out of their condominium, where they originally planned to build a new house. However, the construction of their new house was delayed, and to their shock, the construction company went bankrupt. As the deadline to leave their apartment approached and they were at a loss, wondering whether to look for a new rental property, they found the house I had bought. They had always wanted a house near the wife's parents' home, and had even informally viewed it before I bought it, and had loved it, regretting not choosing it themselves. Renting a new place would involve costs like security deposits and key money. Their child was about to enter elementary school, and they didn't want to transfer schools, making their property search within the school district more challenging. Annoyed by Tom and Catherine's presumptuous moving plans, I decided to go along with this family's offer. They were a very nice family, and I was happy to help them, though they offered to pay more. I only took the real estate fees and gladly handed over the house to them. Honestly, I wasn't attached to the location, and thought it would be happier for a family who saw it as their one and only choice to live there. Thus, my homestay plan was thwarted by Tom and Catherine. But I took it as a sign and decided to boldly go to my daughter and son-in-law's place. Moving to a new place at this age was a bit daunting, but being naturally active, I gradually became excited about starting a new life. Perhaps the long period of caregiving had made me more introverted. I felt like I was returning to my true self in this new land. Playing with my grandchildren, my daughter's children, seemed to rejuvenate me. As planned, to turn my daughter and son-in-law's farm into a winery, I first properly greeted the locals and started building connections. In these times of high tourist activity, my ability to speak several languages was highly valued, and I was kept busy helping out in various places. Thanks to this, I became friendly with the local tourism people and, at the right time, I put up signs directing visitors to my daughter's winery, and placed brochures I had made in local tourist information centers. Next, I set up a cafe near the winery, attracting tourists with delicious and photogenic desserts. The cafe was funded by the money from the sale of the aforementioned house. Also, my daughter's house was large, so we included a homestay business. Initially, it was tough with little recognition, but as good reviews spread by word of mouth, it became a popular tourist spot. While I was busy and leading a fulfilling life, Catherine, having somehow found out, called my daughter's phone. Pretending not to know anything, my daughter said, "What are you talking about? My mother isn't here." But as Catherine continued, "I'm worried about Emily. She suddenly disappeared. If I did something wrong, I want to apologize. Please don't hide her, tell me where she is." My daughter felt pity and handed me the phone. Thinking she couldn't possibly be repentant, I answered the phone, and as expected, she burst out hysterically, "Emily, what are you doing? Leaving like that is unacceptable. We've had a tough time since then." My daughter looked at me worriedly, regretting her decision. When we arrived at the house with our moving stuff, there was a completely unknown family living there. We even went to the police. I felt guilty for causing trouble to the family I sold the house to, realizing I hadn't thought that far. When we went to the police and the real estate agent, they said you gave that house to that family. I was so embarrassed. Despite months passing since then, Catherine remembered her anger vividly. And after a bout of complaints, she suddenly ordered, "Anyway, Emily, come back immediately. What? Why? I replied curtly, and Catherine said something I couldn't believe. Why? Why are you asking? We're the eldest son's family. It's tradition that the eldest son inherits the house. You sold the house without telling us. Now, you need to build a new one for us. My daughter and I exchanged looks of disbelief and decided to try reasoning with her. Look, Catherine. We originally lived in an apartment, so there's no house to speak of. That's not the point. A parent's property is inherited by the eldest son. That includes your labor. As I was left speechless by the term labor force, my daughter snatched the phone, fuming with anger, and shouted, "Please don't treat my mother as a labor force. What's wrong with you, anyway? It was you and my brother who stole Mom's dream, wasn't it?" Huh? Stole? We were just trying to give a useless old person a sense of purpose. You're the one who got in the way. Daughter widening her eyes in shock and taking a deep breath. My daughter then shouted even more forcefully through the phone. What are you even saying? Useless old person? Mom has contributed to the local tourism industry and shouldered the burden of Dad's care all by herself. She's my pride. I won't allow you to mock her any further. Saying this, she snorted in defiance and waited for the other side's reaction. Then Catherine, who had been silent, suddenly started crying. Even if you say that, why do I have to go through this? My daughter looked at me, so I took the phone. Listen, Catherine. I think I've already given enough inheritance to Tom. You can use that to buy a house, right? Then Catherine made a shocking confession. That money, it's all gone. What do you mean? I spend it on shopping. Once I start buying, I just can't stop. I haven't even told Tom about it. What? Perhaps feeling guilty for having been silent so long, Catherine began to cry like a child and started talking non-stop. Actually, that house was bought with your and Tom's inheritance. I've told Tom about it. He's really angry with you. I'm trying to stop him from calling you. No wonder I hadn't heard from Tom. So, please, Emily, help me. Please come back. Her words were almost a scream. I sighed in exasperation and said, "That's a problem between you and Tom, you two need to talk it out." Catherine suddenly stopping her crying, Catherine snapped. So even after all this pleading, it's no use. Remember this, you old hag, and hung up. Clearly, she was emotionally unstable. Afterwards, my daughter blocked her calls and explained the situation to her brother, my son Tom, over the phone. Tom was as arrogant as ever, but seemed genuinely shocked to hear that Catherine had squandered the money, exclaiming, "Seriously? What has she done?" And then, unbelievably, asked my daughter for a favor. "Hey, sis, you got your inheritance, right? I'm the victim here, right? Can you give me half of your inheritance?" Daughter narrowing her eyes in disbelief, my daughter replied sternly, "No way. She's your wife, you deal with it," and hung up. Daughter shaking her head in disappointment, she muttered, "It's pitiful, really. Let's just stop dealing with them." I declared that was the intention all along. There were times I wondered if I had gone wrong in raising him. But their actions, neglecting their bedridden father and trying to move into my new house without permission, were beyond my control and entirely their responsibility as adults. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine that they got divorced. Tom tried to claim back his lost assets and alimony, but she dodged asset seizure by declaring bankruptcy, leaving him unpaid. Their whereabouts after that remained unknown. Years later, Tom appeared at my daughter's house, in ragged clothes. kneeling on the ground, crying and begging for a job. It seemed he had been through a lot. After discussing it with my daughter and her husband, we decided to let him work on the winery. Perhaps because of his rough lifestyle, Tom often overslept in the morning. And we had a hard time with him. But Tom gradually regained a healthy complexion with fresh air and good food. His naturally friendly nature helped him get along well with the tourists. It seemed that the new life in a new land had changed him. Holding a chef's license, he now prepares meals for the homestay, receiving praise from guests, to which he responds with beaming smiles. Surprisingly, about a year later, when my daughter and her husband tried to pay him a modest salary, he refused, saying, "No, it's fine. Just having a job here is enough for me." It appeared Tom had finally understood the value of family. Eventually, Tom married a woman who visited as a tourist and opened a local cuisine restaurant a little away from us. The startup cost was a loan from me, but he has been diligently repaying it every month. His new wife is a hard worker, willingly helping in the winery when needed. My daughter's children eagerly await the arrival of their soon-to-be cousin. Of course, I'm also looking forward to it. The happy future that unfolded before my eyes was unimaginable. At the time I sold the new house, I can't help but hope that this happiness lasts forever. Pregnancy is just a bit of a belly bump, right? You always overreact. If you're a housewife, do more around the house. We're out of beer, get 3 boxes. The words my husband hurled at me, who is close to giving birth, were honestly terrible. I've been living with him since the early stages of pregnancy. But it seems he lacks the awareness of being a father. For the sake of this child, his presence might no longer be necessary. I'm just a normal housewife living in California. 2 years have passed since I got married, and now I'm pregnant. After getting married, I had no choice but to become a full-time housewife at my husband's strong request. But in truth, I wanted to continue working. So, in the beginning, I had days filled with various dissatisfactions and confusions. Do I really have to be a full-time housewife? All my friends are working and managing well. We could just share the housework. I work at a major company, so I'm concerned about how others perceive me. Even though I earn a high salary, if we both work, it might affect my chances of promotion. According to my husband, he couldn't accept the idea of his wife working because he was worried about public perception. However, in this day and age, both partners working is a common choice. And my working would hardly affect his promotion. I thought my husband was worrying too much, but he wouldn't listen to my opinion. Still, I decided to push a bit further and express my feelings. But I want to continue working, and I think it can contribute to our household finances. I don't think there's any need to tell my colleagues at the company. Wouldn't you be embarrassed when I introduce you to my family? Well, as long as you handle the housework as a housewife, that's enough. Protecting the family is a man's responsibility, right? Just leave it to me. I had some dissatisfaction with my husband, who held old-fashioned values. But I still managed the housework flawlessly as a housewife. My husband seemed proud of me for that, often inviting his work colleagues to our home and boasting about me. I really have a great wife. She even prepared delicious snacks today, thinking of you all. You guys seem so close, I'm envious. You've got such a wonderful wife, you need to work harder and keep her happy for life. Not just the boss, but also juniors and peers often came over for drinks. So I was up late many nights. But as a wife supporting her husband, I found it gratifying. Then one day, my pregnancy was confirmed. I was moved to tears, thrilled about the child we had long awaited. It's the child we've been waiting for. I'm so happy. Finally, our family is going to grow. Can't wait. My husband was overjoyed like a child. And we spent our days filled with anticipation and happiness for the new life we were about to welcome. For a while, I carried on with the household chores normally, but after about a month, morning sickness began. Since it was my first pregnancy, I didn't expect it to be this tough. Conveniently, my husband was off work that day. He might be tired from his daily work. But I was feeling particularly unwell due to severe morning sickness. So I decided to ask him for help. I'm sorry to ask, but I'm really struggling with morning sickness today. I feel so sluggish. Just the bare minimum housework is fine. Can you take care of it today? You can order takeout for meals. What? You're kidding, right? Kidding? What do you mean? You seriously think that? Are you trying to force me to do the housework? No, I'm not trying to force you, but it's just that I'm having a hard time with morning sickness today. Isn't that just an excuse? Morning sickness isn't a valid reason to neglect housework, is it? I work hard every day to earn money. Housework isn't my responsibility. No, but I really can't stand people who try to shirk their responsibilities like this, thinking they can just make excuses. Besides, ordering takeout is more expensive than cooking, so cook properly, okay? Despite my complaints of morning sickness, my husband insisted I do the housework as usual. It's true that men can't experience pregnancy or understand the pain of morning sickness physically, which I understand. Still, it's incomprehensible to be dismissed when I'm expressing how tough I feel. A quick search online could have made him understand the hardships of morning sickness. But he remained indifferent. Lying down in disbelief, my husband came to me, looking annoyed. How long are you going to pretend to be sick and rest? Prepare everything for tonight. My boss is coming over for drinks at our house. I was at a loss for words. How does he see me as a pregnant woman? However, he did invite his boss over. And I had to prepare food while feeling like I could collapse at any moment. My husband didn't help me at all, even as I reached the 10th month of pregnancy. It had been truly difficult. Even as my belly grew, his attitude remained unchanged from before my pregnancy. This was the situation as we entered the new year. It was decided that we would spend New Year's Eve at my husband's parents' house, with all his relatives. Naturally, I wanted to go back to my parents' house, but my husband opposed it. Hey, don't you have any nicer clothes? Relatives are gathering, and it's embarrassing to be seen with you dressed like that. But, with my belly this big, loose clothes are more comfortable. My husband looked down on me as if I were insignificant. Sure, I might not look beautiful, but isn't that expected for a pregnant woman? I had no expectations from him, but the end of the year left me feeling uncomfortable. After a long 3-hour train journey, we arrived at my in-laws' house. Cheers. The last toast of the year. As soon as we arrived, my husband started drinking with the people who had arrived earlier. My in-laws and other relatives were considerate of my pregnancy. But my husband just kept drinking. Since I couldn't drink due to my pregnancy, I didn't join the drinking session and relaxed in a room my in-laws provided. And then, hey, what are you resting for in a place like this? Everyone else is gathered in the living room. And here you are resting alone. Don't you think that's inconsiderate? Even if I go to the living room, I can't drink alcohol. And I'm exhausted from the train ride today. I'm not interested in such excuses. Well, if you're resting here, you must be free, right? We're out of beer, so go buy some now. Huh? 3 boxes should be enough, hurry up, will you? Are you listening? I was surprised to hear such words from my husband, even though he was drunk. However, everyone in the living room was enjoying their drinks, and I couldn't disturb them. The atmosphere wasn't right to ask someone else for help. And I couldn't just ignore my husband's request, more like an order. Sighing, I said, "All right, I'll go buy it now." Hearing that, my husband returned to the living room and I rushed out to buy the beer. "Hey, where are you going at this hour?" "It's late, are you sure you're all right?" "I'm just going out to buy something, I'll be back soon, so don't worry." My father-in-law seemed concerned about me. But eager not to anger my husband, I quickly left. I hurried to the store, thinking I might get scolded by my husband if I didn't return quickly. Perhaps that rush was a bad idea. About 5 minutes after stepping outside, sudden labor pains struck. And I couldn't move from the spot. Overwhelmed by intense pain, I battled it alone. Unable to call out due to the severity of the pain and with everyone in the living room. No one noticed my distress. Lying there on the dark street, I felt my consciousness fading away. Not just the agony of the pain, but also the fear of being found. Or worse, left alone outside in the cold enveloped me. Fortunately, about 10 minutes later, I saw my father-in-law rushing towards me. "Hey, what's wrong? It's dangerous on the streets at night, and with you being pregnant?" I was even more worried. While expressing his concern, my father-in-law quickly understood the situation and arranged for an ambulance. In my dazed state, I felt relieved by his help and started regaining consciousness. "I'm having labor pains. It's so painful." "Don't worry, I've called an ambulance. I'll inform my son right now." "No, please don't do that. Don't contact my husband yet, please." As I conveyed these words, my consciousness faded again, but fortunately, the ambulance arrived quickly, and I was taken to the hospital. And there, I was able to give birth to a healthy baby boy. The birth was a week earlier than expected, but fortunately, the baby was healthy. And I couldn't help but cry with joy and emotion. However, after the birth, only my father-in-law and mother-in-law were standing in front of my hospital room. "I'm sorry to interrupt the party, and thank you for coming all this way." "That's all right. But how's the baby? Is everything okay?" "Yes, a baby boy was born safely." "I'm grateful. You seem to be losing consciousness." I was really worried about what would happen. I remember my wife suffered through labor pains too. It brought back those memories? "But, are you sure it's okay not to contact our son?" She said not to contact him while she was suffering from labor pains. There must be a special reason, so I followed her request. Yes, I did say that. My in-laws seemed quite concerned about why I didn't want to contact my husband. It might be difficult for them to understand, but there were several reasons behind my decision. His drunken state was partly to blame. And although he was really looking forward to the baby's birth in the early stages of the pregnancy, that seemed to have faded recently. In the early stages of the pregnancy, he was really looking forward to the baby's birth. We were so happy together. But about a month later, his attitude changed. When morning sickness started, he got angry, saying it was just an excuse for laziness. What? Saying morning sickness is an excuse. He can say that because he's never experienced it. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this. Even when my belly began to show and I gained a little weight. He said I was overreacting and as a housewife, I should do all the housework. He didn't help me at all, even though I was pregnant. I thought about going back to my parents' house, but he said if I, as a housewife, wasn't home, who would take care of the housework? So, it wasn't easy to just leave. That's why I wanted to test something." "Test what?" "I went out to buy beer because he asked me to, but I also wanted to see his reaction. I thought maybe if I didn't come back right away, he would get worried and come looking for me. Especially since the due date was close, and he knew that. In that situation, this idea came to my mind. You mean, that foolish son of mine told you to go shopping? On such a cold night. She's supposed to be resting, what on earth was that fool thinking? I thought something was off. I told my son you didn't have to return to your parents' house because of the pregnancy. Oh? I didn't know that. You wouldn't be able to relax in such a noisy place. We knew you were already 10 months pregnant. And our house is quite far. Even if you took a taxi, I thought the journey would be too hard. No, I didn't use a taxi, I came here by train. Because it costs less money, he said. That foolish man. I'm truly sorry for what happened. I need to apologize too. I'm really sorry. So, did you get any message from that fool? I checked a while ago, but no, there's been no contact yet. Understood. May we handle the situation from here? His irresponsibility reflects on us as his parents too. We'll make sure he takes responsibility. I'd like to hear more. Is it okay if I stay here for a while? Yes, of course. After that, my father-in-law went back home, and my mother-in-law stayed with me, listening to my story. I had been suffering from my husband's moral harassment for a long time, and kept silent not to worry my family. Naturally, I had never mentioned it to my in-laws. But the emotions I had been holding inside gradually grew, and I slowly found the courage to speak up. The next morning, my parents and my in-laws came to visit me in the hospital. Congratulations on your delivery. You really did well. Thank you, Mom. Afterward, we went to see the baby and had a relaxed chat. When we returned to my room, my father-in-law, who had been silent until then, started to speak. Is it time to bring him in? Yes, please go ahead. With that, my father-in-law briefly left the room and then returned. Behind him, I saw my husband with a swollen face. Congratulations on the birth. I'm a father now, huh? I need to do my best for the family from now on. The moment he said that, my father-in-law, without a moment's hesitation, slapped him across the face. My husband stood with a shocked expression, and silence fell over the room. Then, breaking the silence, my father-in-law began to speak. More importantly, isn't there something you should be saying? No. I mean, sorry. I didn't mean to bully you. I just didn't understand the hardship of pregnancy. Such excuses are unnecessary. How many times do I have to say it? You foolish man. As soon as my husband opened his mouth, my father-in-law's face turned red with anger. When I was young, and your father too, we were in the same position. But isn't it natural for a husband, especially when his wife is pregnant, to support her as a husband and partner? Can't you even do the basics as a husband? When you came for the wedding proposal, you said, I work at a big company, so you can leave your daughter to me with confidence. Earning money isn't the only role of a husband. No, I didn't mean it like that, but your actions say exactly that. Don't you realize it? While my father-in-law continued to scold my husband, my parents also gave him cold stares. Unable to contain their anger any longer, they both began to loudly express their anger towards him. For about 30 minutes, my husband was reprimanded by all four of them, including my mother-in-law. Finally, my father-in-law physically removed my husband from the hospital room. Actually, after he arrived home yesterday, he asked our son about you. Then he said something like, she must have gone out to buy something at the convenience store because she was hungry. You know. He got furious and beat him up right there. I didn't know that happened. Such behavior is not acceptable, but we'll make sure he takes responsibility. While saying this to me, my mother-in-law apologized again to my parents and me, then left the room. I had told her about my parents' visit, but she probably didn't expect such a commotion. After 5 days in the hospital, I was discharged and immediately returned to my parents' home. Following a request from my in-laws, I left the baby with my parents and went to their house. Sorry to have you come all this way. No, it's not a problem. I really am sorry. You seem to have more bruises on your face than before, or is it just my imagination? Don't worry, I didn't do it. My brothers were a bit, let's say, thorough. I wonder if brothers who grow up under the same roof end up alike. He received a tough punishment like iron. My husband looked exhausted from the past 5 days, having faced relentless criticism from relatives other than his father. Hearing this, I felt a bit relieved. It's clear who was wrong in this situation. I really want to apologize. I'm reflecting on my actions. You won't change. Please, forgive me. I can't. What? I intend to divorce you, and you won't see the child. As I said this, my husband's face showed shock, and he seemed frozen. Of course, this was a plan I had already discussed with my in-laws and decided upon immediately after giving birth. I couldn't let my child be raised by such a man. I will claim damages for the moral harassment I've endured and child support as well. Also, I plan to explain the situation to your colleagues at the company since I've been involved with them. What are you talking about? I'm not considering divorce. And please don't tell anyone at work. But you often brought your colleagues home and announced my pregnancy. And they were happy and supportive, right? I can't just get divorced silently and not explain anything, can I? If that happens, my position at the company will be jeopardized. What are you saying at a time like this? This is all your responsibility. I tried to raise you as a good son. But I never imagined you'd become like society's trash. You'll probably spend the rest of your life regretting this. But that's... And about the divorce, what about the child? I haven't even held him yet. I can't forgive someone who pretends to be a father, but didn't support me through my first pregnancy and childbirth. What you did was not just irresponsibly fathering a child, but you've also deeply hurt me. Stop pretending to be a father. That's all from me for now. I'll leave the rest to your father and mother. Sorry to have you come all this way. My husband, looking defeated and slightly hyperventilating, held his head in his hands. I ignored his condition and returned to my parents' house. I sent the completed divorce papers to my in-laws. And my father-in-law made sure my husband submitted them. Later, he returned to his parents' house and was placed under their supervision for a period. Any shortfall in alimony and child support was covered by my in-laws. And my husband will be monitored until he finishes the payments. I have confirmed the transfer of the damages and child support. Thank you for everything until the end. We've caused you trouble until the end. I'm really sorry. We will make sure that foolish son reflects thoroughly. His salary will go towards repaying me. And he won't have any free time, so he should learn his lesson. Thank you. My in-laws continued to support me after the divorce and promised to take strict measures against my ex-husband. He expressed a wish to see his son at least once, but I ignored his request. I plan not to let him meet our son until he's an adult and decides to see him on his own. Since I had a close relationship with my ex-husband's boss and his family, I knew their contact information. After revealing everything to his boss, my ex-husband's reputation at work declined. And he seems to face difficulties in his job. I'm living at my parents' house for a while, supported by them and spending happy days with my son. The path of a single mother may be challenging, but I'm prepared to overcome any trials. It surely must be easier than living with my ex-husband. This man here has been defrauded by your mother. You must return $15,000 immediately, or you will be arrested for fraud. Suddenly, a police officer visited my home, along with a young man claiming to have been defrauded by my mother. I couldn't comprehend what I was being told at that moment. However, believing that my honest and kind mother could never do such a thing, I firmly shook my head. That's impossible. As I insisted that it must be some mistake, the officer thrust a warrant in front of my face. Even I was speechless when faced with an arrest warrant. However, the situation took an unexpected turn after that. My name is Chris Morgan. I'm a salaried worker at a general company. I'm busy with work every day, but I'm satisfied as I find my job fulfilling. While leading such a busy life, I took care of my mother when I returned home. My mother had always been frail, and once collapsed from overwork while working part-time at a supermarket. Since then, she had quit her part-time job and was now recuperating at home. She did her daily tasks slowly by herself, but I helped with cooking, laundry, and shopping. Of course, my father helped with shopping and walks when he had time. But he was busy with his job, so I mostly took care of my mother. I never found taking care of my mother to be a bother or unpleasant. She raised me to this point. Out of filial piety, I was looking after my mother. However, she always seemed concerned and kept being apologetic. Chris, I'm really sorry. You must be tired from work, and yet you're helping me. I shook my head in response. Don't worry about it, Mom. My mother's apologies were repeated every day. Although I really didn't mind, I couldn't seem to convey that to her properly. Not just in words, but I tried to show it in my actions too. Though I wasn't sure if she truly understood. That's how my frustrating days were going. A few days later, while I was cleaning the house, the doorbell rang. Thinking it might be a delivery, I opened the front door, only to find a man in a police uniform and a young man around 20 years old. I tilted my head in confusion. Excuse me? Is there something you need at my house? When I asked, the self-proclaimed officer showed me a police badge. May I have a moment of your time? As he said that, he stared at me intently. I tensed up slightly, and he quickly put the badge back in his pocket. Then, he unfolded a piece of paper labeled arrest warrant and showed it to me. Actually, there is an arrest warrant out for your mother on fraud charges. I exclaimed in surprise. For my mother? The officer nodded. As I looked at the paper in disbelief, I saw my mother's name written on it, with a fraud listed under the charges. Noticing my intense scrutiny, the officer quickly folded the paper and put it away. I shook my head frantically in response. No. This must be some mistake. Did my mother really commit fraud? Could you be mistaken about her identity? As I asked this, unable to believe it, the officer nodded solemnly. I understand it's hard for a son to believe. But unfortunately, it's true. Your mother defrauded this man of his money. He gestured towards the young man. The man had been looking down the whole time and didn't raise his head even when I looked at him. Finally noticing my gaze, he slightly raised his head, but quickly looked down again. As I continued to watch him, the officer began to speak. This is Mr. Anderson. He worked at the same place as your mother. Mr. Anderson nodded slightly, though it was unclear whether it was a nod or an acknowledgement. I watched him, thinking. It was true that my mother had worked part-time at a supermarket until a few months ago. Maybe that's where they met. Maybe that's when they had this conversation. As I was coming to terms with this, the officer, speaking for Mr. Anderson, began. He was complaining about not being able to pay his tuition fees when your mother said to him, I can increase it for you with stock investments. He gave her his entire savings of $15,000, which he had earned from part-time jobs. But since then, there has been no contact. The officer looked at me as he said this. Still unable to believe it, I shook my head. No, it can't be. I'm sorry, I just can't believe it. The officer let out an exaggerated sigh. I understand how you feel. It's hard to believe when a police officer and a victim of fraud suddenly come to arrest your mother for fraud. But please accept the reality. I remained speechless, and the officer continued. Mr. Anderson says he will withdraw the complaint. If he gets back his $15,000 right away, then the arrest warrant will be nullified. What will you do? Hearing this, I looked at Mr. Anderson. He stood there, still looking uneasy and mostly looking down. I addressed him. Mr. Anderson? He looked up at me with exaggerated surprise. Observing his behavior, I asked cautiously. Excuse me. Just to confirm, may I ask when you gave my mother the $15,000? Mr. Anderson looked at the self-proclaimed officer. After the officer silently nodded, Mr. Anderson, looking somewhat downcast, answered. What? Oh, right. I think it was about a month ago, maybe? As Mr. Anderson answered hesitantly, I pressed him further. What? Don't you remember? Such an important matter. Mr. Anderson, you were defrauded of $15,000 by my mother, right? $1.5 million is a lot of money. Are you saying you don't remember? That's a lie, right? When was it really? As I bombarded him with questions, Mr. Anderson avoided eye contact and fell silent. As I was about to question him further, the self-proclaimed officer stepped between us and exclaimed. Anyway. He interrupted us with a shout. Startled by his voice, Mr. Anderson and I turned to him. The officer, seeming impatient, said, Mr. Morgan. Are you going to return the money now or not? You don't want to have a criminal in your family, do you? There's still time to make it right. What are you going to do? Feeling pressured by the officer's intensity, I nodded. Right. I understand. As a family member, I want to take responsibility. However, I don't have such a large amount of money here. May I call my father? The officer nodded with a satisfied look. Yes, of course. Go ahead. I took out my smartphone and said, I'll call my father to bring the $15,000 immediately. Please wait inside until then. As I said this, the officer nodded and looked at Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson was also looking at the officer and smiling. Despite my suspicions about the two, I let them into the house and led them to a room. Please wait in this room. As I opened the door, the two looked at me in surprise. I addressed them. I'm going to call my father. Please enter and wait inside. The self-proclaimed officer and Mr. Anderson, looking uneasy, nodded stiffly and entered the room as I urged them. After finishing the call to my father, I entered the room to find the officer and Mr. Anderson standing there, looking lost. I spoke to them. Sorry for the delay. My father will be back soon with the $15,000. The officer turned around with a startled look, and Mr. Anderson stood there, staring at a point, his face turning even paler than before. It made sense. The room I led them to had my bedridden mother lying in the bed. Yes. My mother had been ill, and now she was completely bedridden. I spoke while looking at her. My mother has been like this for a month now. She was always frail, but her condition has worsened recently. Hearing this, the self-proclaimed officer looked at me awkwardly. Mr. Anderson was completely lost for words. I continued, looking at the two. I never realized she was committing fraud in such a state. I still can't believe how she could have done it. As I spoke with my head down, the two began to whisper to each other. I heard Mr. Anderson's panicked voice. No, no. She was supposed to be in the hospital. Why is she here? The self-proclaimed officer responded in a frantic tone. Hey. You checked properly, right? What's going on here? Explain. This is no good. You said her mother wasn't here, so I did this. The officer, seemingly flustered, questioned Mr. Anderson. They seemed to have forgotten my presence and began arguing. I addressed them. But it's strange, isn't it? No matter how you think about it, my mother, in such a bedridden state, couldn't have committed fraud. How did she do it, Mr. Anderson? Were you really defrauded by her? Was it really a month ago? Can you explain it to me, from your own mouth? As I bombarded Mr. Anderson with questions, he turned pale and responded. No, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't Mrs. Morgan. Maybe it was someone else, maybe? Mr. Anderson said with a dry laugh, and the officer looked away, appearing troubled. I continued, looking at Mr. Anderson. Do you lose a large sum of money over a misunderstanding? Mistake the person who defrauded you? I'd remember if it were me, Mr. Anderson. Why doubt my mother now? And how did you know she was recently hospitalized? And officer? Suddenly called out, the self-proclaimed officer looked at me in surprise. I said, what did you mean earlier? Why is it a problem if my mother is here? The officer replied with an awkward laugh. Did I say something like that? I nodded. Yes. You said it while whispering to Mr. Anderson. The officer remained silent with a wry smile. Mr. Anderson looked at me, his face drained of color. As I observed them, my father entered the room. Chris, sorry I'm late. As I turned around, my father nodded slightly. The officer and Mr. Anderson let out small cries of alarm as they saw my father. In front of the two, my father apologized with a look of regret. It seems my wife has caused trouble. I'm really sorry. Mr. Anderson, was it? Here is $15,000. Please check it. Mr. Anderson, with trembling hands, received the thick envelope my father offered. The officer, his face pale, peered into the envelope along with him. As I looked at my father, he was watching the two with a serious expression. A few minutes later, after Mr. Anderson had really checked the contents, he spoke to my father with a trembling voice. Yes, there's definitely $15,000 here. I've received it. After confirming that, Mr. Anderson, with trembling hands, put the thick envelope into his bag, the self-proclaimed officer hurriedly said, Then, we'll take our leave now. Since you've returned the money properly, we'll withdraw the complaint and cancel the arrest. Please rest assured. Before I could say anything, the self-proclaimed officer and Mr. Anderson quickly attempted to leave the room. That's when my father shouted, Detain them. At his shout, two men apprehended the self-proclaimed officer and Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson screamed while the self-proclaimed officer yelled, You can't do this to a police officer. You won't get away with this. Do you realize what you're doing? My father then took something out of his chest pocket and showed it to the clamoring duo. What a coincidence. I happen to be a police officer too. Seeing the words Assistant Police Chief on what my father showed, the self-proclaimed officer looked up at my father, his face turning pale. Indeed. When I called my father, I told him about the arrest warrant issued for my bedridden mother on fraud charges. That a man claiming to be a victim of fraud had come with a man claiming to be a police officer. And that I knew all of it was a lie, and had informed him in advance. I'm pretending to be deceived to buy time, so please come quickly. My father had said over the phone, Understood. I'll be right there. Chris, hold them off for 30 minutes. So, I led the two to the room where my bedridden mother was and waited for my father. My father, after putting away his police badge, spoke calmly. Do you guys know? The self-proclaimed officer and Mr. Anderson, their faces drained of blood, looked up silently at my father. Looking down at the two, my father said, the moment you accepted the money, it became a case of fraud. Falsely claiming to be a police officer. Forging badges and police IDs is a crime of impersonating an official. Creating your own arrest warrant amounts to forgery of public documents. The self-proclaimed officer gave up trying to free his restrained arms. And Mr. Anderson became docile with a look of despair. As my father and the others began to take the two away, a faint voice was heard, and I couldn't help but shout. Shh! Quiet. Dad. Mom. My father looked at my mother's face in panic. Hey. Do you recognize me? Chris is here too. As my father and I looked at my mother, she woke up and said with a small smile. I recognize you. David. Chris. It's quite lively, isn't it? My mother, calling out our names, chuckled wryly. My father, relieved, turned back and nodded. Thank you. Your actions woke up my wife. Who would have thought this would be the trigger? Life is unpredictable. But a crime is a crime. You'll have to pay for it. Take them away. The self-proclaimed officer and Mr. Anderson were taken away following my father's words. I watched the scene, feeling a slight sense of gratitude towards the two. Until now, my mother had never talked so much even when she woke up. Her eyes were often vacant, and it was hard to understand what she wanted to convey. But this time was different. She called out to my father and me, laughing at the commotion. As I looked at my mother, she was talking to my father. My father, standing up, patted my shoulder. Chris. Thank you. Your quick thinking allowed us to arrest those two. It's not clear yet, but given their practiced manner, there might be other crimes. I'll be late again, but please take care of your mother. I nodded. Of course, Dad. Mom and I will wait for your return. So take care and don't push yourself. My father nodded and left the house with his colleagues waiting outside. After that, my mother began to show signs of recovery. She started to come out of her room little by little, spending her days in the living room, sunbathing in the garden on sunny days, and going for walks with my father. Seeing my mother getting better and my father's happy smile made me feel content. My name is Emily. I married my husband John 3 years ago, and now we live a dual-income life together. I work in an office job, while my husband John is a system engineer. Since I usually get home earlier, I take care of things like dinner and bath. However, I'm not a morning person, so he makes breakfast for us. And even prepares our lunch boxes before making breakfast. So, we've been in a mutually supportive relationship for these past 3 years. But suddenly, unusual contacts started coming to both of us. First, John received a call from his mother. His mother and I don't have a bad relationship, but we don't have much to talk about either. That's because she doesn't seem to be very interested in John. It seems John was an easygoing child who could manage everything on his own without much help. In contrast, his younger sister Rose seemed to be a much more demanding child. And his mother seemed to favor her over John. This doesn't seem to have changed even as they've grown up. Unlike John, who can take care of himself, Rose seems to rely heavily on her parents even as an adult. And his mother continues to dote on her. So, when John and I got married, his mother just offered some formal words of congratulations, and that was it. I had heard from John that his parents prioritized Rose over him. And I thought, based on those formal greetings, that they weren't very interested in us. Because of this, we never felt the need to contact his parents. And they rarely contacted us either. So, both John and I were surprised by the sudden contact. He answered the phone and exchanged a few words before hanging up. What was that about? Rose is getting married. Huh? I was surprised. To John and me, Rose seemed like a grown-up girl who still depended on her parents for everything. And spent her time at home without working, receiving allowances from her parents while trying to find a boyfriend to go out with. We saw her as someone who underestimated the real world. Both John and I didn't have a very favorable impression of her. When we went to visit John's family, she pushed me aside, saying, "I have a date with my boyfriend," and left. That was the only image we had of her. So we didn't expect our impression of her to get any worse. But she exceeded our imagination. Not only did she make unreasonable demands, but she also ordered food without hesitation when Rose said, "I'm not in the mood for fish today," while poking at the grilled fish with her fork tines. I couldn't help but tense up. When I visited John's family with him, my parents immediately liked John, but they expressed their dislike for his family quite openly. However, they restrained themselves from saying anything inappropriate at the celebratory meeting of both families. In the end, it turned into a gathering aimed at pleasing Rose, rather than a meeting of both families, and John apologized for that. However, my parents, who had been informed in advance by John that his family might be unusual, shook their heads in response to John's apology. Both of them insisted that John wasn't at fault, but they were worried about his family. If that family were to attend the wedding, it could potentially disrupt the atmosphere. This time, it was a gathering of close family members. So it might be forgiven, but since the wedding would also include colleagues from work, it might be better not to invite them. In fact, my father was the president of a company, which made John genuinely concerned about his family. My father is the president of the company I work for. But I didn't mention it to John until he proposed. At that moment, he made a hesitant expression and said, "So, Emily being the president's daughter, if my family turns out to be strange people, will they oppose our marriage?" Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. But after meeting his family, I became sure of it. I didn't want to introduce them to my father, his acquaintances, or people from the company. Maybe John had been thinking the same way as me because he said, "I won't invite my family to the wedding. Instead, my grandparents, who have been like parents to me, can attend." Is that okay? I didn't doubt John, but my parents and I decided to meet John's grandparents. We met them at the same traditional French restaurant as before, and they turned out to be genuinely nice people. They were the ones who raised John and made him who he is today. So, my parents felt reassured, and we decided to invite John's grandparents to the wedding. To avoid any unexpected disruptions, we decided not to inform his parents and his sister Rose about the wedding, and proceeded with the ceremony. A few days after the wedding, John's family was informed about the wedding and the decision not to invite them. But they just said, "Oh, that's just fine. When you had your wedding, we happened to be on a trip with Rose. We had no choice but to miss it." I couldn't help but feel sad even though it wasn't about me. I told John that I didn't want him to feel lonely, and he quietly hugged me. With that history, neither of us had a good impression of Rose or his parents. However, if we were invited to a wedding, both John and I would attend. After the contact from John's mother, his father also informed us that Rose was getting married. Then, Rose herself contacted us. According to John, her message was a boastful one. "I'm getting married to a wealthy man. I'll be living a life that's beyond comparison with yours. Aren't you jealous? We were content with our modest life, so we didn't feel envious. However, we were indeed impressed by her marrying someone referred to as a wealthy man. When the wedding invitation arrived at our home, I was surprised to see the name of the groom. It turned out that he was someone I knew from my father's business connections. It's a small world, and I thought that sometimes strange coincidences happen. Both John and I attended the wedding. Rose and her husband looked very happy at the wedding. And the ceremony was magnificent and wonderful. I briefly wondered how much it must have cost, but seeing the couple so happy, I didn't dwell on it. Rose's parents were in tears, celebrating their beloved daughter's wedding. Right next to me, John mumbled, "Now, they can let go of their child," and it made me want to laugh. A few months after the wedding, I received some sad news. My uncle, who had always been fond of me, had passed away. I attended my uncle's funeral with my parents and John. I also extended my condolences to my uncle's wife and children, and offered to help them if they needed anything. About a month later, I received unexpected news about inheriting part of my uncle's estate. I was surprised by the inheritance news. However, within a few days, I received a call from Rose, out of the blue. I didn't know how she had my contact information, but I answered the call from an unknown number, and she said, "Hello, is this Emily's number? You're John's wife Emily, right?"
Yeah.
"It's me, but why are you contacting me?" "I've heard it from Mom, the contact info, I mean. I still think it would be better if you contacted John if you have something to say. Considering I've never even shared my contact info with you. I got it from Mom, okay? Anyway, what's this about inheritance?" I was surprised and asked. "Huh?" The inheritance discussion was something I had only shared with John. I couldn't imagine John sharing that with his parents or Rose. However, I didn't understand how Rose had come to know about it. I was puzzled, and Rose continued her explanation. "Inheriting the estate, is it $2 million? That's amazing. When are you getting the $2 million? From now on, Emily, you and your brother don't have to work like crazy. So life will be easier, right? I'd like a piece of that too." Rose, can you please calm down? I can't calm down. It's $2 million. I can't just sit here. I need to act fast. It seemed like Rose wasn't hearing my words as she abruptly ended the call. I thought about calling her back several times, but she remained unreachable. When I returned, I told John about Rose's call regarding the inheritance. He seemed surprised too and said, "I haven't discussed the inheritance with my parents or my sister." If John hadn't told her, where could Rose have heard about the inheritance? But Rose making a fuss about the inheritance isn't her concern, is it? It's unrelated to her. That's true, but she seemed so excited. She probably thinks that once we have the money, there might be some benefits for her too. Let's make sure to keep our distance from my family. I'll also warn Rose not to have any misconceptions. All right, please do. I had thought that John would put an end to this conversation with Rose. However, she had misunderstood something and caused quite a commotion. We only realized the extent of Rose's actions when her mother told us. Rose has built a $690,000 house. Rose was not working and was primarily a housewife, or at least that's what it looked like. Even with her husband being a wealthy heir. We found it hard to believe she would make such a massive purchase. Suddenly, John had a thought. Didn't she mention wanting a share of the inheritance over the phone? Well, yes, but what if she's thinking she'll get a share of the money too? Just by virtue of us inheriting it? I couldn't believe that she would think that way, even though it had crossed my mind earlier. However, if she had indeed built her house expecting a portion of the inheritance, she might have made an irreversible mistake. But the house was already built, and there was no turning back. As we contemplated what to do, I received a call from Rose. She sounded very cheerful. "Oh, Emily? It's me, Rose. By the way, where's my share? I've built a $690,000 house, you know. I really want my share soon. The payments are getting tight." Huh? Even though I had suspected it to some extent, I hadn't truly believed that she expected to receive a portion of the inheritance. I let out an incredulous gasp. Rose seemed annoyed and continued. "Could it be that you're trying to keep all $2 million to yourselves? Listen, when Emily inherits the $2 million, Emily and John will each get $690,000, right? Then, the remaining $690,000 will be mine. You better give me my share. I won't tolerate any greediness. I've already waived my inheritance." The insistence of Rose made me almost burst into laughter. Even if I were to inherit the estate, it would belong to me and not some portion to give away to her or John. While we might use it as a couple and discuss with John, there was not a penny earmarked for Rose. However, this was not the primary issue at hand. "What do you mean? It's a $2 million inheritance, right? Abandoning the inheritance is ridiculous, isn't it? I don't know what you're misunderstanding. But the $2 million from the inheritance includes his house on the island. But the island wasn't my uncle's property. So there's also money allocated for demolition, making it $2 million. When you consider the costs of demolition and my uncle's debts, only a few will be left. There were also complications related to visiting the island and other issues. So I decided to abandon the inheritance." Is this a lie? There's not even $690,000. I built a house, you know. I want my $690,000. We don't have that kind of money. In fact, I had realized when the inheritance reached me that there must have been a significant reason for my uncle's wife and children to abandon their shares. Listening to the details of the inheritance, I also decided to waive my claim. And I had discussed it with John. This can't be happening. I heard from my husband that his acquaintance passed away and left a $2 million fortune. I even made plans for the house against my husband's opposition, thinking I'd get money from you. It seemed that Rose had misunderstood and believed that I would give her $690,000 for the house she had built. She somehow shifted the blame onto me, saying, "How could you do this? You've ruined everything." Even though I had no recollection of such discussions or promises, I didn't tell her the inheritance details. It was simply her misconception. Regarding the house, can you please discuss it with your husband?" Saying that, I hung up her call. When I told John about her conversation, he said, "My sister has really messed up. I can't believe she's this foolish." He immediately contacted Rose's husband, who explained, "I suspected something was off. But Rose came to my place with her parents and threatened to divorce me if I didn't agree to let her build the house." He continued, "In reality, the house hasn't been built yet." Hearing that the house had not yet been constructed, both John and I felt relieved. While we thought about it, my phone started ringing with calls from Rose. It seemed she was making the calls from her own house, and her husband explained, "She's trying to make calls with the door open. She's ranting about you, Emily. I'll start divorce proceedings." After apologizing to me, he added, "You're not at fault." I agreed with him and hung up. We decided to take a moment to calm down. When we checked the phone later, there were dozens of voicemails. Not just from Rose, but also from her parents. All of them seemed to be supporting Rose and berating me with comments like, "Rose is pitiful, don't deceive her. Get the money ready. You probably don't like Rose, do you? Stop being jealous of a young woman." Beside me, John muttered, "We need to cut ties with them." I had no desire to continue any relationship with them either. I also informed my parents about the situation, to ensure Rose's parents didn't cause them any trouble. My father assured me, saying, "Don't worry, we'll handle it if they come over." Afterward, we remained mostly uninvolved in the matter. Rose apparently received a stern talk from her husband, who told her that he never trusted her and that she could go through with the divorce if she wanted. In the end, she caused such a scene that her husband had to call the police. It appears that Rose's husband tried to involve a third party in the conversation initially. He called a mutual friend to mediate. However, during Rose's outburst, she accidentally injured this friend, leading to a physical altercation that resulted in her being taken into custody by the police. While Rose was causing a scene and being taken away by the police, her parents decided to visit my family home. Upon arriving, they began shouting insults at me, saying, "Your daughter is a jinx. She promised to pay $690,000 but didn't." They also made derogatory remarks about me, prompting my parents to quickly report them as suspicious individuals and call the police. My father warned them, saying, "If you continue to insult my daughter, we'll get a lawyer involved." This seemed to have a sobering effect on Rose's parents, who became more composed. They received a call from Rose's husband, informing them that Rose had been taken by the police and was now free from her unreasonable demands. They learned that Rose hadn't actually built any house, and that her husband had grown tired of her demands, as well as her parents' encouragement. The fact that Rose had caused harm to a friend and was now being asked for money seemed to shock her parents. In the end, Rose went through with the divorce, surrendered all her money to her parents, and their family finances were in disarray. As for John and me, we never disclosed our new address, blocked them, and got new phones, so we believe we won't have any further involvement with them. Michael stuck his head out of the car window, flashing a sly grin, and said this: "You're no longer needed, someone else is here, so you don't have to come back." At that moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Outside, the wind was howling, and the sound of rain beating against the window amplified my anxiety. The sea in front of me was stormy, its waves seeming ready to engulf me. I was 9 months pregnant, holding my heavy belly, and I didn't have a driver's license. I couldn't go outside in this state. He'd help me. "I'm telling you, I can't drive," I screamed at Michael. However, he just smirked and turned his back on me. "Well then, try your best to run away." He said this contentedly and left. Thinking that this was the end of it all, I resigned myself and closed my eyes. I am Daisy, 35 years old. I used to be a nurse, but now I'm a full-time housewife. Being 9 months pregnant and having a big belly has made life harder than before. But I'm looking forward to the day I meet my baby. I can't wait to meet my baby. Every day, I talk to my child, filled with this thought. My meeting with my husband, Michael, was about 5 years ago at a marriage counseling office. I've always been shy and had no experience in love, so I never thought I'd find a partner in my daily life. Following my father's advice, I honestly registered at the marriage counseling office. Having lost my mother quite some time ago, my father was probably worried about my future after he was gone. Understanding his concern, I promptly visited the marriage counseling office when he suggested it. In the office, there was a difference in the number of men introduced to women in their 20s and 30s. Naturally, more men were introduced to women in their 20s. I regretted not going to the marriage counseling office sooner. But the moment I met Michael, all my regrets were swept away. Michael was handsome, with a face like an actor's, and his manner was gentle and attractive. The only concern was his low income. But I decided not to worry about it as my income as a nurse was stable. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and astonishingly, we were married a year later. I thought my father would be relieved that I became Michael's wife. How is it? Did you get pregnant? A few months later, the topic of children came up with Michael. I also wanted children, and considering my age, we decided to synchronize our efforts for pregnancy. As my friends were getting married and having children, the desire to move forward grew stronger. Sorry, it didn't work out this time. I was in my 30s when I started trying to conceive and visited a gynecologist for the first time. I thought it was the fastest way to get answers on any matter. At the gynecologist, it was necessary to continue checking the maturity of the eggs and estimating the ovulation day. However, this involved a considerable financial burden, and the pregnancy journey was not easy. I hoped to get pregnant with minimal burden, but it wasn't as easy as I had thought. Although Michael seemed understanding, occasionally, his irritation showed through. Synchronizing our marital life for pregnancy might have been stressful and taxing on his tired body from work. I understood his feelings, but I thought there was no need to express them so openly. Sorry. I hope it works next time. Sigh. I'm counting on you to get it right next time. Michael seemed to blame me for not getting pregnant smoothly. When he said, "Get it right next time," I couldn't help but think this wasn't something I could achieve through effort alone. Despite my doubts about Michael's attitude, I decided to undergo fertility testing. I was hoping that if we could find the cause, it might bring us closer to pregnancy. A few weeks later, I reported the results of the fertility tests to Michael. I had the tests done, and there weren't any particular problems. However, it seems difficult to pinpoint a definite cause for infertility. Maybe it can't be helped. So, it was just a waste of money, huh? Michael's response was rather cool. Despite my worries and undergoing the tests, he didn't offer a single word of comfort. I didn't necessarily want comforting words, but realizing that he fundamentally believed the problem of not having children was my fault made me feel complicated. Hey, infertility can sometimes be caused by the male partner. I know you might not like it, but would you consider getting tested? If the problem wasn't with me, there might be a chance that Michael was the cause. However, knowing how complicated it would be to face the possibility of being the cause, I asked him carefully, considering his feelings. However, Michael's reaction to the suggestion was one of disgust. And the way he looked at me changed. What? Are you serious? The infertility issue is your fault. Why should I have to get tested? Michael's irritated voice sounded unusually loud in my ears, and the air grew heavy. Marital life should be built on cooperation and understanding. And it was harsh to have the cause of infertility pushed solely onto me. Even if he wanted to refuse, couldn't he have chosen his words differently? But fearing that I might upset Michael further and affect our future efforts to conceive, I couldn't muster the courage to argue. Right. You're correct. Let's just keep trying together without any tests. My voice sounded resigned, but Michael just snorted and walked away. I decided to think that the long struggle with infertility must be tiring him out as well. I had thought this pain in my heart was something we could share as a couple. It's not just me who's suffering. Still, deep sighs were incessant in my heart. It's been 3 years since we started infertility treatments, and we've tried everything. After realizing timing methods weren't effective, we attempted artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization, but to no avail. Driven by our strong desire for a child, we we persevered. However, at one point, we decided to give up on having a child and enjoy our life as a couple. And started spending more relaxed time together. Then, in this new lifestyle, I discovered I was pregnant. Yes. I'm pregnant. The moment the home pregnancy test showed a positive result, I was overjoyed. Michael was surprised too and kept asking, "Really?" That moment might have been the happiest in my life. The joy of this pregnancy, coming after struggling with fertility issues and nearly giving up, was exceptional. It felt like something had been watching over us. When I told my father, he was delighted, saying, "I'm so happy I'll get to see my grandchild's face." When the pregnancy was confirmed at the hospital, my life changed significantly. Since nursing was physically demanding, I decided to quit, relying on Michael's income and my savings. However, as my life changed significantly, Michael's attitude began to change drastically too. He was upset about restrictions on drinking and going out due to my pregnancy, and started showing an unhappy face every day. It's often said that marriage cools down during pregnancy, and Michael seemed to be a prime example. He started coming home late on weekdays and going out early on weekends, showing no interest even when I had medical appointments. "I have a checkup today, aren't you free after? Let's go out somewhere." Staying at home all the time is depressing. You're the only one who's free. I'm busy with work. But it's Saturday, your day off, isn't it? Shut up. I have work left over. A useless pregnant woman should just keep quiet. Honestly, I was quite angry with Michael's attitude towards me. Every time he spoke to me rudely, I felt like something inside me was breaking. I never imagined he had this side to him before we got married. Whether the long infertility treatment caused the change in Michael, or if he was always indifferent to a pregnant wife, I couldn't be sure. But it was clear that his attitude towards me had changed, emphasizing his coldness. Since becoming pregnant, Michael had been completely indifferent to my condition and restrictions, continuing his selfish behavior. No matter how unwell I felt, he neither cooked meals in my place nor helped with the household chores. Sometimes he even ordered me around in a tone like, "Hurry up and prepare dinner. I'm not feeling well today. Can we eat out or buy some ready-made meals? What are you talking about? Eating out costs money, you know. We can't afford such wasteful expenses. I'm the only one working, after all. You should work more too. Don't laze around just because you're a stay-at-home wife." I began to lose understanding of Michael, who just kept making such dismissive remarks. Despite struggling with morning sickness and physical changes, I managed to do all the housework, yet I never heard a word of appreciation from Michael. Michael, who promised to cherish our family when we got married, has not even greeted my father yet. My father is eagerly waiting for the day Michael will visit him. But Michael doesn't seem to care about that. I had visited Michael's parents to greet them before our marriage, which made his attitude even more unacceptable to me. While struggling with my poor health, I prepared a meal for Michael. I didn't have an appetite, so I only made food for him. But he ate without concern for me not joining him. Thinking about continuing life this way made me feel increasingly heavy-hearted. It was clear that Michael had no intention of helping with child rearing in the future. Tears spilled over as I realized the reality we had reached. After overcoming infertility treatment was far from ideal. However, time passes no matter what, and I entered my 9th month of pregnancy. I prepared for the baby's arrival with my father's help. Of course, Michael was no help at all, and I had stopped relying on him. Now, the only person I could rely on was my father. Amidst all this, during the summer holiday, Michael suggested we go on a trip. A trip? Well, I'm already 9 months along, so it might not be possible. You can make it. The due date is still a way off. And I'll make sure it's not too much for you. It'll be fine. After some thought, I decided to go along with Michael's suggestion. I was more happy than anxious that Michael was proposing a trip after such a long time. On the day of the summer holiday, I got into Michael's car with our luggage. It was already past 6 in the evening, and it was getting dark outside. Michael is good at driving, and we always take the car for long trips. As someone without a driver's license, I find the idea of long drives daunting. But Michael always seems confident. Hey, I just realized I haven't asked where we're going. Where are we headed? That's a secret. There's a surprise waiting. I felt excited but also anxious about this unusual behavior from Michael. It was surprising that he, who usually treated me so casually, suddenly started taking care of me. I checked that my phone was in my pocket and fastened my seatbelt. It's been over 3 hours. Where are we going? I'd be happy if you could just sit back and enjoy the ride. No matter how many times I asked, Michael wouldn't tell me our destination. The weather was turning bad. And I started to feel a bit sad thinking we might not enjoy the trip if it kept up. Then, after about an hour more of driving, rain suddenly started pouring down, turning into a thunderstorm. I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up, the situation was surprisingly bad. Outside, it was dark, and lightning lit up the night sky. Hey, is it safe to drive in this rain? It's fine, they said there would be a little rain on the weather forecast. The rain was getting heavier, far from what Michael called a little rain. The car windows were being pelted with large drops. And the wind was so strong that our car on the highway was shaking badly. I reached for my phone in my pocket, filled with anxiety that we might get into an accident. At that moment, Michael turned off the highway. The exit sign displayed an unfamiliar place name, and I had no idea where we were. Filled with unease, Michael continued to drive, humming a tune in the bad weather. It seemed suspicious to come to the sea on such a stormy night. However, I fell asleep again, only to be woken by Michael suddenly saying, "We're here." The sea. What stretched before me was a wildly churning sea. The moonlight eerily illuminated the water, and the waves crashed tumultuously. Just as I was wondering why we were at the sea at such a time, Michael suddenly turned off the car engine, opened the driver's side window, and got out of the car. Rainwater started coming in through the open window, wetting the driver's seat. Hey, Michael. You are stupid. Did you know about today's typhoon? There's no way I'd take you somewhere on such a bad day. I was confused by Michael's sudden burst of laughter. He looked down on me, laughing in a way he never had before. What? Were you deceiving me? You're slow to catch on. Being with you even before the pregnancy was a pain, and since getting pregnant, you've just been lazing around at home, not doing any housework. I don't need a wife like that. His words weighed heavily on me, making me feel unbearable. His words were too much for someone who was supposed to be my partner in our fertility journey. To me, Michael looked like a devil incarnate. Outside the window, the weather was stormy, with rain and wind violently hitting the car. Michael smirked, reached through the window, started the car engine again, and put it in a drive. I've already got someone else to replace you, so you don't need to come back. The wind and rain raged outside, and Michael laughed triumphantly. His smile sent a chill down my spine. The tumultuous sea and rainstorm overwhelmed my spirit. In a panic, I shouted at Michael. Help me. You know I can't drive, right? With my 9-month pregnant belly. The strong winds outside made it impossible for me to leave the car. Moreover, I didn't have a driver's license, so there was nothing I could do. Well then, try your best to escape. Watching Michael leave, I was overwhelmed with loneliness and despair. The sea was flooding, and the road was submerged in water. There was no other choice left for me. I closed my eyes, calmed my mind, took a deep breath, and resigned myself to the situation. The next day, with my large belly, I returned home with someone. The thought of Michael, who had left me in the storm, being there made my legs tremble. I asked the person accompanying me to wait outside the house and entered the entrance. There were unfamiliar high-heeled sandals there. I quickly realized what it meant, but my heart still pounded fiercely. Moving to the living room, I saw a man and a woman cuddled up on the sofa, watching TV. The TV was showing the damage from yesterday's typhoon. They didn't notice my presence. It was a hassle. Driving to New York in that typhoon. Wow, that far? Sounds tough. Well, it's all to start a new life with you, Susan. Really? That makes me so happy. Michael's cruel actions and the woman's affectionate response made it all clear to me. Michael had left me in the raging sea to marry this mistress. Sorry to interrupt. But didn't the newscaster just say they found a pregnant woman's body in the typhoon-struck sea? Michael and the woman turned to me in shock, looking at me in disbelief. Michael pointed at me, his voice trembling. Why are you here? His reaction was as expected. He never imagined the pregnant wife he abandoned at sea far away in New York would return home. Why? Because this is my home. When I started this obvious fact, Michael seemed even more confused. He was screaming incoherently, "Why?" I sighed, looking at Michael and the woman, and revealed the truth. I thought your behavior was strange yesterday. So I called my father on my phone. Of course, I recorded that call. I forgot, but my father had put a GPS on my phone, which came in handy this time. He drove to Nagata to rescue me. Right? Then I pointed towards the entrance. Then, my father, who had been waiting outside, entered the room and greeted Michael. Michael, it's finally nice to meet you. Michael, who had never greeted my father before, seemed quite perplexed by his sudden appearance. I'm not angry that you never came to greet me before. But I can't forgive you for throwing my daughter into the sea. My father's calm tone made his anger even more evident. Michael visibly flinched at his words. However, trying to maintain bravado or impress the woman, Michael retorted against my father. Why should I listen to you? Do you even know how much trouble your daughter has caused me, you bastard? Father's face turned red with anger at Michael's harsh words. I had never seen someone behave so rudely and use such foul language. What? Did you just insult my daughter? I was willing to pass on my wealth to you, even knowing how self-centered you were. But that was a mistake. I won't give you any of my precious wealth or my daughter. Michael reacted sharply to the word wealth. To Michael, who didn't know much about my father, this was a big surprise. My father, a wealthy investor, intended for me to inherit his assets. However, I hadn't told Michael about this yet. I was planning to tell him once our child was born and things had settled down. But due to the recent events, my father had to break the news. I never heard about this. Were you deceiving me? Why didn't you tell me? Michael's tantrum was like that of a child not getting his way. Yes, I intended to tell you. But now, I have no desire to pass my assets to someone who harms my daughter. I wanted to tell you. But your attitude and harsh words made me change my mind. Oh well, you could have lived a life of luxury with our child and me. Such a pity. It's not too late, right? Come on. Let's live together happily as a family of 3 with that wealth, right? Grandpa, you agree, right? Michael's attitude was so outrageous that my father didn't even bother to listen to him. I took out the divorce papers from my bag and handed them to Michael. I intend to divorce you. Naturally, I'll also be seeking child support. Do you think things can go back to how they were before? Shock and anger were evident on Michael's face. His idea of committing infidelity and then trying to secure my father's wealth was extremely unreasonable. Even the woman he was with was shocked, her eyes wide open. Michael, I'm sorry, but I had you investigated by a detective. You've been divorced before, haven't you? You couldn't have children with your previous wife either. I know you're infertile. Yet, you dared to treat my daughter terribly. I have no intention of giving you any of my wealth now. Everyone in the room gasped at my father's words. It was finally revealed that Michael was infertile. He had hidden this, behaving as if the fault lay with me during our fertility struggles. You knew about this and kept quiet? You said you wanted to marry and have children with me, didn't you? No, it's not a lie. I thought I could have children with Daisy. And with you too. Besides, I don't love you. I only thought of marrying you because I heard your parents were wealthy. What am I supposed to do now? Their argument intensified. Unable to bear it anymore, I exploded in anger. Enough. Michael, you're the one having an affair. You're the worst here. You should at least feel remorse for leaving your pregnant wife in a storm. You make me sick. Just get out of here, quickly. I had never shouted like this before, being a calm person. Michael and the woman looked at me in surprise and fear, letting out a small scream. I presented the divorce papers to Michael again. He tore them up in frustration and stormed out of the house. The woman, in a panic, got up and ran off, forgetting her high heels. Phew. What just happened? Since being abandoned at sea yesterday, I felt like I was in a dream. But feeling the lively movements of my child in my belly, I realized this was reality, not a dream. Dad, thank you so much. If you hadn't come, I might have been dead by now. I'm glad I could be there for my precious daughter in her time of need. My father stroked my head, and the warmth of his hand seemed to instantly heal my fatigue. Thus, I divorced Michael, consulted with a lawyer, and successfully received child support. Receiving child support doesn't heal the emotional wounds. But as I'm about to become a mother, I have no choice but to live with a positive outlook. Michael and his mistress didn't end up together. The mistress lost interest in Michael after finding out he was infertile. And she realized he was only marrying her for her parents' wealth, which led to their breakup. It must be shocking to learn that a marriage was sought for money, not love. While I harbor resentment towards her, I can't help but feel a bit sympathetic for her entanglement with Michael. Michael, lacking passion for his work, ended up quitting his job. Since he was never career-driven, it might be difficult for him to find new employment. He'll likely have to make ends meet with part-time jobs while living in a shabby apartment. However, considering the suffering Michael caused me, it still feels like a light punishment. Compared to him, I consider myself fortunate. Now, I'm attending yoga and sewing classes, enjoying my time with other pregnant friends. Once I'm used to parenting, I plan to return to my nursing job. Currently, I'm living a happy life at my father's house, eagerly waiting for the day I meet my child.